Hey there, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here, and we are back with another episode of the Flex Diet Podcast. And today I've got my good friend and guest, Kristina Hoyer, and we talk about a wide range of things from high stress situations. What should you do in them? Different ways of getting through them. When should you walk away? This may be an experience to a sport you're doing or even a heavy lift in the gym. We also talk about her career in the military as an elite Navy rescue swimmer and her transition out of that back into civilian life. And then a fair amount of discussion about, I would say, just trauma in general. And are there different tools and techniques you can do? What is her experience with that? So I originally met her at Dr. Ben House's place at the Flow Retreat Center in Costa Rica. And I helped her with some pain that she was having. That was a very transformative experience, I think, for both of us. And it definitely helped. So she talks about her journey with that and where she's at. And then we discuss some lessons that you can apply if you're going through something similar in your life or you know someone that is. And just a real wide-ranging conversation. She's awesome. I would highly recommend you check out her stuff, especially most of it. The newer updated stuff is on Instagram. We'll have the link down here below. Really, really wonderful stuff. And she's been out here to the Extreme Human Performance Center, done some fun max 2Ks and metabolic cart testing and Moxie and club bells and lifting and sprinting and all that kind of fun stuff. So enjoy this conversation with Kristina Hoyer. And this episode is brought to you by the Physiologic Flexibility Certification. So the PhysFlex certification is 4 different based interventions of how to become more resilient and more anti-fragile. So once you've got the basics down of exercise and basic nutrition and recovery, what should be the next area you would want to focus in? Or if you know you're going to be in a high stress situation coming up, or just want to be better prepared for whatever life has for you next. I would argue that these 4 interventions are the best way to facilitate that ability to be more resilient and anti-fragile. So that is the basis of the Physiologic Flexibility Cert. You can go to physiologicflexibility.com for all the information there. It is currently not open yet, but you can put your name on the wait list and you will be able to get all the information about the next time that it opens. So enjoy this conversation with my good friend, Kristina Hoyer.
Good. How's everything been in your world?
It's been good. We got back from South Padres, stayed a day and a half in Austin. So we got back May 5th, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, which was good. It was good. I mean, we got a fair amount of kiteboarding. I got out maybe like 10 days, which wasn't bad. I flew my 17 meter probably half of the time. So, of course, I would like a little bit more wind, but had some good days on my 12 meter and didn't quite hit my goal of a 20-foot vertical jump, but I hit 17 feet and I hit consistently over 10 to 14 feet and landed probably 90% of them. So that was a lot better in terms of landing efficiency, where before it was a little bit more hit or miss. And then had a PR for distance, got like 111 feet, somewhere around there. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, so it was pretty fun. It was good. It was fun. I took my surfboard out one day. Didn't do any foiling. I was going to, but the water a lot of times was like super low. And the days it was
Okay.
a little bit better, it was windy, and I'm like, screw it, I don't want to learn anything new and get the shit kicked out of me. I just want to ride my twin tip and try to jump. So
Yeah. Especially when you get the opportunity to like have really good wins for that. I feel like you kind of
yeah.
have to take advantage of that anyways, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of like, pick your battles, and
Mm-hmm.
but nothing too bad happened. I blew a valve once, so I had to walk in from like a 3-hour session, so that kind of sucked.
Oof.
And then I had my spreader bar exploded on me one night, which was my own fault because I've used it probably 13 years, and I literally that day was like, yeah, I took Jody out in the afternoon. I'm like, I'll go back out. I'm like, I should probably use a different bar. And I got all the way out there and realized I didn't grab the other one. And I'm
No.
like, it'll be fine. I've used
Yeah.
it for 13 years in a row. No worries. And it was like an evening session, and I went to load up for a jump, and all of a sudden I hear this loud snap, and like like everything was gone. Like,
No.
so yeah, because you've got a chicken loop, this loop that holds you into the line. And then my
Okay.
thought was, well, we've got a safety line on the side. So if that breaks, the safety line will pull the kite and you can still get access to the kite. It just, you have to walk in or whatever. And the
Yeah.
water wasn't over our head there. So they both exploded and they both disappeared. So all of a sudden, there goes my kite, my bar, my lines, like everything. I was like, oh shit.
Dang
And so I'm like
it.
running through the water, like trying to get it. And luckily, two of my other friends, one of my friends went out there and grabbed the kite so it didn't keep
Okay,
going
good.
off. And then another guy came out, and so I'm like, well, I'll just roll it up and walk in. And I was pretty far out at that time. So he was nice enough. I deflated it. He came back and just grabbed it in a big ball. And then it was, of course, evening. So it's starting to get
Jeez.
dark. And I'm just like, oh man. Like before that, I'm like, I could self-rescue, but the wind was a little bit offshore. So I'm going to end up like way on the other side. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I'll just keep walking as long as I know what direction is towards land and don't get disorientated. And then like another guy came by and dragged me to shore, and then it was only like about a mile and a half walk on shore once to get back. So
That's still like that's pretty hefty. That's like
yeah,
with like all your gear and everything too. Like that's like kind of a walk.
yeah. So luckily I didn't have my kite at that point. Someone brought my board up, so it ended up it
Okay.
worked out okay. I got all my stuff back, and nothing was other than the spreader bar was broke, but yeah, so it could have been a lot worse than that. So
After 13 years, see, that's like a pretty good run.
I know, and it's one of those things where like I inspected it every time, but I took way too many materials classes, but it's like what they call a catastrophic failure, where
Okay.
everything was fine, but if you get like a little bit of a crack inside, when all of a sudden you load it on pressure, the whole thing will just blow. So
Yeah.
yeah, lesson learned.
Lesson learned. Maybe every 10 years, like replace the equipment or something like that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did that with my helmet this year before we went on a ski trip in February. It's like, I've had my old one for probably 10 years. Yeah, probably just time to suck it up and get a new one.
Yeah. It sucks with like how it's an investment. I feel like for any of those type of sports, like buy once, cry once, I think is the saying,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So it's like at least it lasted 10 years instead of it being like, okay, I gotta buy this. And then like just 3 or 5 years from now, I'm gonna spend that chunk of change again. So 10 years is not too bad.
Yeah. And I also do this mental thing where I have some money saved that if I have to, lose a kite, which could be hundreds to thousands of dollars, depending upon which one, that I practice the mental thing of just letting it go, which I know sounds a little weird because I
No, it
don't
doesn't
want
sound weird at
that
all.
slight hesitation when something's going really bad where you have to purposely get out of everything to be like, no, I should try to save my kite. It's like, no, just that can be easily replaced. Like other shit that happens to you can't be. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I've gotten
No,
better
that
with
doesn't
that.
sound weird at all. I feel like that's just a good practice in general in life, right? Like material things can be replaced, but like your life or limb is like you can't put a price point on that until you
Yeah.
experience like losing your capability to do something. And then you're like, maybe it would have been better for me to let go of my very expensive piece of equipment so that I could like continue to do this sport or continue
Yeah.
to live life, you know?
Yeah. And especially like I've also practiced going to different areas sometimes, or just days where like everything looks great. Like there's no reason you feel like you shouldn't go. And there's such a like that that fine line between I know it's a little stress inducing versus am I really feeling like something's not right? You know what I mean? Because there's
Right.
always a little apprehension, and that type of thing. And we were in Australia a couple of years ago, and I dragged all my kiteboarding gear down there. It was supposed to be windy, and we were there for 2.5 weeks. I'm like, oh, this would be great. We got a rental car. We could move the gear around. So I'm hauling my gear to like all these different places we were at. And the one day we get to this new beach and wide open areas, not any rocks, fair amount of waves. It was pretty windy. I was like,
Hmm.
nobody else is here. And
Hmm.
Jody was like super nervous about it too. And I'm just like, it just doesn't,
Feel
something just
right.
doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? You're just like,
Yeah.
So I didn't end up going, which I think is probably the right decision.
Yeah.
But that was like the only potential time I actually could have went on the whole trip. So it's like this thing of like you paid all the money, you haul all your gear around, you're trying to do this thing, but then you have the chance to do it. It's like, are you still able to walk away at that point because you had this feeling of like it may not be a good thing, but there's
Yeah.
that kind of the pressure also of like, I came here to do this thing and I brought all this stuff and I paid all the money and so
Right.
which is irrelevant at that point, but it's like the sunk cost fallacy. It's like, oh, I spent all this time doing this. Like it's, that doesn't matter at that point, but
Right.
you mentally, you're just still kind of focused on that.
I think it's like I'm not going to be able to quote this properly, but I like a mountaineer saying too, that like on the
Yes.
days that feel like it's like the absolute most perfect day to go, like that is like most often not the right day for you to go. Cause it's
Yeah.
like, that's like the day where like the most devastating things tend to happen on the mountain or something like that. I can't remember. I remember hearing it in a documentary, but I think it's like that inner, I don't know, this might sound funny, right? But like that inner voice, like that
Yeah.
inner knowing of like, okay, there's a difference between my like exhilaration based fear around like preservation of life, but I'm doing like these sports that push you to that edge. And then the other side of that, that's like, there's something that feels just off about this today.
Mm-hmm.
Like that little small indication that like, depending on what sphere of like the world and science you anchor into, like is either your subconscious gathering a whole bunch of bits of information that you're not consciously bringing to the front of your mind and you don't necessarily fully understand, but it's just indicating to you this, or it's like your intuition, like your deeper inner knowing. That's just like, there's something that's going to go wrong that you can avoid by like listening to this,
Yeah. And that's always hard too. Like even with lifting, like everybody's had, and probably you've had it, I'm sure I've had it, people listening to this podcast where you're like, you kind of have to make that split second decision of like, do I push through this rep or do I kind of not? Right. And you don't
Yeah.
have like a whole bunch of time to think about it at the point where you have to decide, right?
Yeah. Standing there for a couple of minutes. Like, I don't think so.
Yeah. I had that problem when I was learning to wakeboard and trying to, on a full length rope, cross, jump from one side of the wake to the other side.
Yeah.
And it just sucks so bad when you miss, right? Because you just hammer into the other side of the wake or you don't quite make it or you land funny. And so I got in this habit of like going off and then halfway through just freaking out and just like letting go of the handle.
Oh, dang.
A couple of times I actually landed it, but I didn't have the handle in my hand. So then you go through the process of like trying not to hold on, and then you just get pummeled half the time. And there's no easy way, I don't think, a lot of times to, when you're in that kind of middle ground, right? Because if I let go all the time, I'm never going to make any progress.
Right.
If I hold on 100% of the time, a small percentage of some bad shit's going to happen. But if it's a new thing, like you just don't have the skill set to figure it out, right? So it's just like, how can I kind of ride the edge of, yep, that was a good time to let go. Nope, that wasn't. And sometimes you just kind of have to force yourself through it a little bit too,
Yeah. Yeah. That's that like riding, I guess, like riding the edge, I guess you could call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I feel like genuinely only comes from experience. Like you have to get out there and like get totally pummeled by a wave, like over and over and over again.
Yeah, I can imagine surfing's very much like that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Surfing, I feel like is very much like that. And it's like, that's the reason why these sports are kind of fun to us though. I feel like is we've gone through really good surfing days or really good kiteboarding days where it's just like a total blast and you're like
Oh yeah.
hitting it and you're knowing your bot, like your weight distribution's amazing and like you're able to really like connect, I guess, with like the board and the equipment and like move through things well. And then there's the other days where you're like, nothing went well today. I learned a lot though on like what not to do on this board and what waves I am currently capable of handling and what waves I'm not currently capable of handling. But yeah, I've left my soul in the ocean a couple times.
And I think you get better at making that sort of split second decision too, of in the moment, is this the right thing or not? I remember also kiteboarding a couple of years ago. I went up, I was doing a jump, and for some reason I was probably like 12 feet up, and the kite was, instead of above me, was out in front of me. So I completely screwed something up. I remember being at the top of the jump, looking at my kite in front of me, and I'm like, oh fuck. And I just let go. Like I let go of the bar, I just let go of everything. Which means at that point, you're just going to drop out of the sky like a sack of potatoes.
Ooh.
And like the second I did it, I was like, oh, it was so bad. You just have this thought of like, that was so the wrong decision, and then like later you're like, I should have brought the kite back up over me and it would have been fine. But
yeah,
again, you have that like millisecond to kind of decide, and knowing when do you override what everything in your body is telling you to do. Right.
Yeah.
So in kiteboarding, when you bring the bar in, you actually can power up the kite so it goes faster. So when you're learning, when you watch people and they get really stressed out, even like seasoned pros have gotten, damaged or killed, unfortunately, sometimes when something happens and they freak out and they pull the bar in, which causes everything to accelerate. Right. Because that flexion response of getting stressed is to go in the fetal position to pull stuff closer to you, which just accelerates whatever bad thing was happening to you at the time. So can you get enough reps in where you can hopefully have that like, a couple milliseconds to override that and to retrain it to let go, or, to get out, and kind of what are the consequences of that too? Just like Olympic lifting, right? Like, when do I ditch the weight and when do I try to fight through it because I think I can get it, right? Knowing that carries an inherent risk, but it also carries a higher reward. Like when you do that and you actually get to the thing, you're like, oh, it was like the best ever.
Yeah. That is so true. When I first started Olympic lifting, I remember just like I had a very, very, very aggressive mindset block.
No.
What? In Olympic lifting? Wait. And it sounds like a super simple weight, but it's just that like once I hit 135 and I had like a 45 on each side, and I could stack like a whole bunch of 10s and put a 5 on and it would be fine. But it was having those plates on there. And I like my mind every time was like, gets you to the point where it's like, you're going to die if you do that. Right? Like it's for sure. And so it's interesting, like with things like this, and like one thing that comes to mind a lot with it is like cold water exposure, right?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Like really practicing overriding that initial instinct of like your mind is literally like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? This is not going to be good for us. And practicing and developing that muscle and that like kind of that switch, that mindset switch. Cause like you said, it's like a millisecond they have to decide like from the pull to the full extension to the catch. Like you have to be able to override that part of your brain that's like, don't receive this bar. Like don't, it's going to be bad for you, bad for us, bad for longevity and survival. And then, but once you finally get over that and you like actually stand up with a weight and like complete a whole lift with a weight, like that PR moment or that mindset breakthrough moment is like nothing else. Like so amazing.
Yeah. And I think of the two examples I think of too. One of them was like scuba diving. Like we did some dives down in Bonaire years ago and we were down not like 100, 110 feet, and it's usually pretty relaxing. The water was super clear, but there's also the thing of, once you get past 40, 60 feet, especially with recreational diving, you can't really freak out. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like
Yes,
you've got a
absolutely.
partner there, right? You can know all the safety protocols, you could buddy breathe, etc. But you can't just ascend back to the surface,
No.
right? Because you have to do a safety stop, all these other things. So it's a weird mindset of like, okay, nothing can really go wrong, but if it does, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Like, so I think you
Mm,
only get better at that with practice,
yeah.
right? So doing it in a safe environment, practice buddy breathing, practicing safety measures. And a lot of it after that is just, it's kind of this mental thing, right? So I
Mhm.
like you said, the cold water too, of can I test myself in ways that are very, very safe? So very high safety margin, but
Yeah.
I get the same sensation, right? And I agree 100% with cold water because, you've been here, right? We've got the freezer. It's a pretty
Yes.
safe environment, right? I mean, and the safety factor is pretty high. Even at 45 degrees, you could be in there for several minutes and you're still going to be fine. It's not going to be fun, but you're not really going to damage yourself. And obviously, at some point, you could.
Right.
But I think that's a good way to practice that kind of mindset of if I'm in a situation where if I freak out, some really bad things can happen. Right.
Yeah.
So like even kiteboarding for a while, I would freak out. So I would let the bar out in the air, which then causes the kite to kind of luft and you just to crash out of the sky. And so
Okay.
like on a bigger jump than what I expect, can I just keep holding the bar in because everything in your body kind of wants to let
Let
go and
go.
get away. But if you do
Whew.
that, like even worse stuff's going to happen,
Yeah.
and just kind of getting more comfortable with that. Like, oh, okay, I did 10 feet. That was good. Okay, I did 14 feet. Okay, that wasn't too bad. And then being able to be in a more relaxed state. And when you can do that, like you have more sensation, you actually have more data, you have more information. Can I go off? Can I like look around a little bit while I'm up, like know about how much time I have? Or
Yeah.
the first time you do like a jump of 2 feet, you almost piss yourself. You're like, ah.
I did. I love that. No, that's like, I think that's something that for me, I mean, I think just in general, right? People look at people like individuals who have either participated in like a high stress job or high stress athletics or whatever, right? Arena of life that they've participated in, like many moments of like acute adrenaline and acute stress. And then they have this like overall, like more, I would say like grounded and calm, like demeanor about them, I think throughout like regular life. And a lot of that I think comes from like that realization that like if you can stay in like a less stressed space, then time slows down a little bit. You
Mm-hmm.
actually have the opportunity to gather a lot more data and a lot more perspective so that you can like respond to a situation instead of like allowing that innate reaction to be the first thing that kicks in. And then there's that like secondary response that is more of how you wanted to move through it, but now it's like, well, you already reacted and now we're experiencing the after effects of the reaction instead of the forward movement of the response, you know?
Yeah. So in your past job in the military, tell people about
Yeah.
what that was and how do you think those concepts apply to what you did in the past?
I would say so. I was a United States Navy rescue swimmer for 6 years, and it was a blast. It was a crash course in how to handle yourself in high stress situations for sure. I remember the first time that I ever did SAR jumps and like actually jumped
And what
out
is a
of the
SAR
hell.
jump for people who don't know?
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, I should remember that not everyone knows
I
military
know the
terms.
military has like as much more acronyms probably than physiology. So,
It's madness. We save so much time though,
oh,
by
totally.
shortening
I
all
get
our
why it's
words.
done. Yeah, yeah.
So search and rescue jumps is basically where you're coming out of a helicopter. On the side of the helicopter, we're jumping out of the door and jumping into the ocean in an attempt to save somebody who's stranded or drowning or anything where you're swept out to sea and are unable to save yourself. Of course, there's like jet ejections and down helicopters and man overboards and all that other kind of stuff as well. So we typically by the publication are supposed to do jumps from the helicopter at a certain height and a certain speed. But when we're doing training jumps, we have multiple rescue swimmers jumping out of the helicopter at a time. So it's like jump one, jump another, jump another. And as they're jumping, the helicopter pilot is like pulling power and lifting to come out of the hover for when we're jumping out. And so the last person to go typically gets a much higher jump.
Poor bastard.
Yes. And the first time I jumped out of the helicopter, even though I'm definitely a bit of an adrenaline junkie myself, everything in my body was like, no, you've come this far. I know that you made it and all, but you know, we're done here. Like this is where we draw the line. And so I hesitated. They tap on your shoulder and it's like, jump, jump, jump. Right. And you're supposed to deploy yourself from the helicopter. And I just sat there and I was just frozen, like absolutely frozen in fear. And my instructor at the time gave me an encouraging push.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it's your time. You're going out one way or the
you
other.
have to go. You have to go. And so I jumped at a much higher height than I should have because I did hesitate. Right. And that was on me. And so I think like that and that happening over and over and over again through my career, like getting to jump out of the helicopter and then that on top of, you know, landings at night and other more stressful things happening. You're flying in a helicopter, right? There's a lot of things that go into operating those types of things when you're deployed and at sea and actually on mission sets. I think for me, like the biggest thing that developed for me and the applicability of it is that there's almost like this separation now between like that instinctual voice and then like the more resiliency based higher voice. And like that voice gets to be louder now and has the opportunity to be like, well, I'm the adult in the chair who gets to make these decisions. And like, yes, you have those responses and those reactions that are more innate, but that higher voice and that one that's been developed through those high stress situations is like honestly probably the most helpful thing for me to just like have that recognition in that space between where I have the opportunity to respond versus react and also make decisions on like, I can create more time and more space when I need it, as long as I can remain like calm and collected enough to gain data and perspective and then move forward and then be able to make decisions a little bit quicker than if I would have just stayed in the reaction. Because like that time that I jumped, when I stayed in that reaction, I was so frozen. And if I would have been in the state I am now, which of course, like I needed all of those years of development, I would have been able to go a lot quicker because I have that resiliency based mindset developed from those many moments of experience.
Do you think some of that is like the technical term they use is like threat inoculation, which is just fancy words for putting yourself right on the sort of the hairy edge of where things could go awry, but it's probably within your training and your comfort zone. Obviously, they're not doing this on day one. You have extensive training that goes into it, but
yeah,
in certain situations, no matter how much training you have, you're just emotionally and limbically wired for your body to be like, this is a bad idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've never heard that term before, but I completely agree. And like you said, right, there's like that certain amount of training exposure that we have with it, but there's nothing that can equate to like literally coming the first one, you know, like you're flying in and like the helicopters, you know, dropping down in altitude and your feet are already out the door and like wind is flying by and like depth perception is so different. Like when you're above the ocean and in a helicopter. So you're at like 50 feet and you're like, this doesn't look bad.
Yeah.
But then you get into like the 10 or 15 foot and you're like, wow, this actually is like, this is kind of scary. This is kind of like, what if this goes wrong? You know? And we have so many protocols for safety and so much training that goes into it, and a proper way to jump and not a proper way to jump, and, regulations and standards for speed and altitude. So I agree with you. It's like right on that threshold of the threat where it's like, there's a probably like 70% chance that this should go right.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're right there in the sweet spot, I guess you could say, for a threat inoculation.
So what do you think about at that point? Like, what do you do? Did you have any sort of personal things you would do or things you found helpful?
Man, let me think about that. I would say at that point, when I was in the beginning, there was nothing I thought about besides I have to do this.
Yeah.
Right? I have no choice but to do this. But further down the line, I think what really was helpful for me is like, similar to how some athletes have like a setup or like a pre-game ritual, or even for people who don't necessarily play sports, but they have like a systemized way of like going into things that make them nervous, whether it's like a podcast or a client call or whatever, right? Where you have your rituals. So I think what eventually became helpful for me was like anchoring into like, okay, like all my gear is checked. Like, this is how I check my gear. I'm at the edge of the door in the helicopter. Like, I'm as far out as I can go without falling out of this helicopter. Like, I can clearly communicate with my crew chief. I'm off of comms, but like, I know that they know what they're doing, and I know what I'm doing. And I've checked all my gear. I know exactly where I'm going, exactly what I'm doing. And like having that like kind of procedural anchor, I think was really helpful to like reaffirm to me in the moments, like, you know what you're doing. You've been here before. Yes, there are factors that are different, but the success rate has been there, and you've recovered from the ones that weren't as successful.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, because you're not always going to be like, oh, that was the best thing ever. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the worst, like hardest jump I ever took was from like 35 feet.
Oh.
And it was, like the last person coming out of the pole of the collective. The helicopter was trying to, pull away from it. Right.
Right.
And I knew it was too high, and I tried to communicate it, but I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. Right. I'm just going to get it over with. We're in a training jump. And I jumped out of the helo, and we kind of joke in our community, because that's what happens when you go through like hard stuff together.
Yeah.
That like the amount of arm swings like on your way down, because you'll like jump holding onto your radio and your mask and snorkel. But when it's a really long fall, you'll literally like rotate your arms to try to like keep your body up. And it's usually like one rotation for like every 10 feet. And so I like rotated my arms so many times trying to keep my body upright. And I ended up having like black and blue bruising all the way like on the back of my thighs and my bum. And the bottom of my chin like ripped open. Like I had a slice from hitting the water. And my mask and snorkel flew off, but we like tie them to our equipment because that happens sometimes and we don't want to lose our mask and snorkel. And so I like that flew off. So I had to like find it. And I was like, I'm okay. I'm okay. But after like moments like that, it's about like, for me, it was always about coming back to like, all right, what are the percentages of times that you've had success? And what is the percentage of time that you've had like a blip or what you could consider a failure or whatever you want to look at it like. And it was always, as long as like my percentage of recovery or my percentage of good executions through stressful situations was higher than the amount of failures or perceived failures, then it's like always anchoring back into that. Because I'm super analytical. So of course I'm going to spend like an excessive amount of time analyzing why this went wrong. But if I spend all my time doing that, then I'll just sit in fear forever, you know?
Yeah, with snowboarding, when you'd go off a jump that you weren't quite expecting, we call it in the air rolling down the car windows. You're like, ah! I did that once at Mount Bohemia when I was up at Michigan Tech. I did ski patrol. And so we signed on there. I didn't normally do ski patrol up there. I did it at Mount Ripley. And we got up there, the hill had just opened, and they just got hammered with snow. Like on the run that wasn't open yet, there was like 3.5 feet of snow. And so I'm with another guy. We're going down. I was like, hey, I'm like, look at all that snow there in that closed run. That'd be fun to do. He's like, let's go do it.
Oh,
shit. Gonna like kick us out. He's like, where's ski patrol? Who's gonna kick us out? I'm like, oh yeah, good point. Oh, no. And we knew they had it roped off because they're line testing the chair, but that wasn't until 1 p.m.
Okay.
So we sneak under there, and I'm going down the hill, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. And I see this little mound. I was like, oh, it's gonna be fun to jump off this little mound. And I go off, and what I didn't know is that it dropped like 20 feet on the other side. And so I go off thinking
no,
like a 5-6 foot drop. And I'm in the air, like just rolling down the car windows going, oh!
For like a long time.
For like a long time. And it was nice and soft. So I landed, nothing bad happened.
Good.
Actually landed on my board and then just face planted right after that. But that was like still probably like one of the best runs I've ever done in my life. And then the patrol director shoot us out for a good half hour, and yeah, but it was worth it.
We're snow patrol. Who's going to tell us no?
I know. He's like, when it says closed, that means no one's supposed to go down it. I'm like, oh, sorry.
You're like, but if you would have seen how epic the run was.
I know. I think there's other saying too that it's people don't rise to the occasion; they fall to the level of their training.
Yes,
which is something I try to think about too. Right. So kind of at some point you have to kind of take that leap, right? But can you kind of progressively just train a little bit more, like kind of expanding your capacity just a little bit? But at some point, you just kind of have to go for it too,
Yeah, absolutely. I almost feel like those two, like that, like those unexpected crazy jumps, like in life all around, are kind of like those things that set that new bar for us. Like whether or not you've actually been like trained to that new bar, right? You haven't been trained to it yet, but it at least sets like the possibility, kind of like, we weren't able to run a sub 4-minute mile until somebody did it.
Yeah. Right. Bannister. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's even for our own individual capacities, like taking those leaps and taking those jumps, even though they're unexpected most of the time, like almost open our eyes to like, oh man, like maybe I actually have like this whole level of capacity and capability that I never really wanted or expected myself to tap into. But now I have like an expectation of like, this is the new level I want to be working towards. So how can I start tailoring my training to push me to that level through like the incremental changes over time? And then I can take that jump in an expected manner.
Yeah. One of the phrases I like, and God, I can't remember the guy's name, but I think it's the crazy guy who invented the Segway. But he had a saying of like, don't tell me it's impossible. Just tell me nobody's done it before. Right. Which I thought was really good, because a lot of people will confer that, well, nobody's done it before, therefore it's impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Which is actually an inaccurate statement. It just means nobody's done it before. Right. It may be possible. It may actually be impossible, but the answer is we don't know yet.
Right.
So I always thought that was like super interesting.
I love that. I love that too. Especially like the we don't know yet part. I think that's a part of, I don't know, just like discovery and science in general that we've like kind of almost like gotten away from in some of like the public sphere of things, where it's like a lot of science is about discovering and trying to find new places and things and paths and stuff that we've never done before and that we don't know or understand. And it just hasn't been there yet. Or it really might be impossible, but we don't really know that yet because we haven't really tried it.
Yeah. If you want a better answer, you probably need a better question.
Yes. Yes. It's a skill set too, learning to ask really good questions.
Oh, definitely. Do you think your mindset was all of this stress will make me better, or how did you view just stress as just a general thing? Because I think it many times gets, I don't want to say misinterpreted, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I could agree with you, especially when we're coming to like when we're looking at like the simple stories, right? Stress, I think, is like distilled into this like demonized thing, right? When I was in the service, I just loved stress. Like that's it. Like I thrived in the space of like I have to always be so busy. I remember when I was younger, even before I got in the service, like the way I would measure like a successful day was like whether or not I got to the end of the day and my feet hurt. So it was like I had to be so busy and so like stressed out and like had to constantly have that like adrenaline drip going on. But so I did very much so see stress as like my advocate. Stress was like my that's what was always going to be the thing that got me to the next level as like a human being or as like a service member, rescue swimmer, an aviator, whatever I wanted to apply it to, an athlete. And the interesting part about that is that I got to the end of my 6 years and then ended up having to develop a very new relationship with stress because I was so addicted to it. And it was the only type of life that I knew and the life that I loved. And then my body started to demand me to slow down a little bit more and to become a little bit more purposeful with how I used stress. And the cool part about that is that like now it's like more of an effective lever than ever before versus before it was just like, I need it, right? More stress. Like, give me my stress. I need to like constantly be moving that even taking like a rest day or a day to like actually integrate and recover and like you need those like that is a part of an effective training regimen is like having time to recover. And I never could understand that. Like people who would rest or take naps or like take a day off. I was always like so confused. Yeah. And then once my body really started to ask that from me, it was like, okay, now let's learn about how can we take this advocate, this friend, this like thing that we've always known to be very helpful and effective for us, but how can we make it actually more effective and more helpful and like more intentional instead of it just being like this kind of thing that would just like grind away with me. And then I'd get to the end of like, you know, like a couple months of like really a lot of busyness and be like, I wonder why I'm so tired. Weird. More coffee.
Yeah. That's similar to me. Like I spent, God, decades of my life being the solution to all life's problems is work harder, drink more coffee, listen to more death metal.
Yes.
Right.
Amen. Amen.
And it's like, and the hard part is because that actually does work up until a point where it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then you're left with this. Your brain is so confused because all your associations were that this was a thing that helped me reach whatever level you're at. And now the cost starts becoming exponential for it. And you can't do it like you did before. And you're left just going, oh, what? Whoa. And then you feel like you don't have any coping mechanism. You feel like you can't get anything done. You're comparing it to what you did before. And yeah, it's kind of a very interesting transition.
Yes. I would say one of the most aggressive transitions to make in like a lifetime, like one of them, right? There's many, but one of them. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see like so much of the veteran population like come out of the service or have seen at least come out of the service and just kind of like aimlessly wander for a while because there's so much like there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, but there's so much of this stress lifestyle. And then you get out and there's no one's pushing you anymore. No one's like putting that pressure and that constant stress anymore. It's just like, now you've got to figure out how are you going to do that yourself and make it purpose driven and not make it just like this. I'm just going to beat myself into the ground until my body can't do it anymore type of mentality, you know?
Yeah. And I've had some interesting conversations. They probably won't mind me sharing this, but with our good friends, Jeff and, Rick, obviously from Special Forces experience.
Yeah.
And just talking to them. And I think they would openly admit in public, and I'm not putting words in their mouth per se, that I think both would agree that to be the person they're at now, which is very different, especially being out of the military, that that person consequently probably couldn't do the jobs that they did before, but
Yeah.
at the same time realizing that they want to be somebody else and be something different now, which I
Yeah.
always think that it's really cool when you can see people who have done what I would imagine is an excruciatingly hard transition and have done it successfully, right?
Yeah.
Because it's you're transitioning away to be somewhere else, but knowing that by doing that, you wouldn't be able to do the job you did before, even though you don't want to, right? It's almost
Hmm.
like letting go of like that was almost another person, another time in your life,
Yeah.
versus I've seen other people who haven't been able to do that, right? And they're still holding on to this thing that they did before, even though they can't do it now and they're not required to do it now. But it just seems like they're having a hard time transitioning because they're still kind of stuck in the past all the time too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like I mean, the military is designed to be in the military, right? Like it is
Yeah, exactly.
very masculine, very structured. Like it is the military, right? It has a very intentional and important job to do. And I mean, being able to witness and just like from a distance witness and then know little pieces of Rick's story too, like watching him grow and evolve and change from his exit to like where he is now has been such an inspiration for me. And Jeff, I don't know personally, but being able to watch like the development of the special forces experience and the way that they've put that together too, I just think that the transition out and as you're kind of like born into like a new version of yourself, you almost have to like say goodbye to that identity that you got to hold while you were in the service. Cause I know for me and me then and me now, what I feel like I look like two different women because I was so just pure intensity, pure adrenaline. There wasn't any space for softness or like empathy or love or like the appreciation of like even going to like botanical gardens and like enjoying like the beauty of flowers or like really like sitting at the beach and just like loving being by the ocean uh like like listen, we don't have time for that. We need to go to the gym for like 3 hours and then go be super intense somewhere else, you know. So I think like it is this opportunity to expand into so much wider of like the spectrum of what's available in life. And I can absolutely like echo those sentiments because it's like if I would have stayed in the service for 20 years, I would have missed out on this like almost like yin side of life that is like filled with joy and ease and love and emotion. But it's really cool because it affords the capability to still tap into that adrenaline and intensity and like more of that um like well-rounded human. And I think some of like the most well-known martial artists in our lifetimes have really conceptualized that idea as like once you can be embodied in like the yin and the yang, you can be more intentional with your intensity and then that intensity becomes even more powerful, which is
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I think of that as, can you oscillate between parasympathetic and sympathetic, right? If it's time to
Yes.
relax, can you down regulate low enough to actually relax?
I love
And
that.
consequently, if it's go time, it's go time. Can you upregulate to get to do whatever it is you need to do? And
Yeah.
just again, I've never been in the military, but a lot of my friends who have, especially at very, very high levels, I think they've gotten much better at this. Some of the highest levels are actually better at this than other levels of teaching people, okay, here's I was talking to even Jeff about this, like using RPR and other stuff to teach them to down regulate, but you can't directly sell that because that's not a rewarded thing. But selling it as this will help your shooting accuracy, this will help your performance, which it definitely does. There's lots of anecdotal reports on that. And then they have the experience. This has happened to a few people of, oh, wow, that actually helped my performance, but it also helped me to down regulate off the performance on the other side. right? So
Yeah.
can you kind of sneak it in of like, yeah, vegetables are good for you, but we'll stick them inside a donut first, you know?
Yeah.
Here, eat the donut.
Here, eat the donut. It'll make you a better human being all
Right.
around.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts of like, what have you found that it's helpful to kind of get through those transitions?
Uh, one of the, I mean, breath work has been huge for me. Not even breath work, right? Because I feel like those like coin terms can kind of come with a lot of preconceptions, right? Like
Sure.
meditation and mindfulness and breath work, they all kind of come with their own preconceived lenses. But even just like being able to hear my breath and influence my breath has been really huge, because that changes when you're in a parasympathetic versus a sympathetic response. And being able to influence that, or even just hear it or feel it, is huge, because it's almost like training your ear or training your senses to be able to more regularly detect it. And then one of the ones that I super love that I actually teach like some of my clients and stuff too, because I feel like it's kind of incognito, is like being able to like incorporate your senses, like your sense of touch or like your motor sense. And one for me is like, if I like can feel myself going into like a more sympathetic response, and I either want the sympathetic response and then I want to like come back to a neutral space, or I want to stay like really centered in the sympathetic response. I literally do like a breath to touch with my fingers. So it's like an inhale and I touch
Mm.
the pointer finger, exhale, touch the next finger, inhale, touch the next finger, exhale, touch the next finger. And it just helps really keep me in like an intentional, centered, grounded sympathetic response, instead of that like space.
Do you
And
watch your
like,
fingers? I'm just curious. Do you
do I
have a
want
close focal attention at that time?
it depends on where I'm at and what's
Okay.
kind of going on around me. If it's something that like I'm in front of people and I don't want them to know that I'm like secretly freaking out,
Right.
right? Like then it's just down by my side and I'm not looking at it. But if I am like preemptively, or if I'm just in a space where I can like literally kind of pull back, then I do watch it. I feel like that the watching it helps me so much more than when
Yeah.
I'm not able to
That's what
see
I
it.
was wondering. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cause that's like, that helps. Cause when you're parasympathetic, it's more like wide field of view. Right.
Right.
And
Yep.
then sympathetic is like bringing it more into like that acute, closer
Yep.
point of
Yep.
vision. Okay. Yeah. So that's like, those two help me a lot when it comes to either like staying focused in the acute responses, or when it's like coming down from it, it's like really, the breath helps me come back to my body. And when I'm in my body and like I really feel like that, like all right, I can feel all of my limbs, right? I can feel like my entire body. I'm feeling really grounded and I feel like calm again. That is usually brought on by like, okay, let's do some nasal breathing. Let's do some box breathing, some longer, slow exhales. Those really help me come back. And then like the finger touch is like that's my all-time favorite.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Any
Yeah.
other things you found that are helpful?
Um, let's see. When it comes down, well, I mean, cold water immersion is awesome. Like if you're coming off of like you went to go skydiving and you want to like not have an adrenaline rush for like 48 hours, and you want to just like come back to the body like quicker after. I have used that, or even just like cold water on the eyes. Like if you're not able to get into like a
Hmm.
whole cold shower or whatever like that, cold water on the face, cold water on the eyes. Um, yeah, I'd probably say those are like my own most personally used type of techniques to like kind of come back to center and like really stay here. I used to be like a big believer in like mantras and like inner conversations and things like that. But I've kind of pulled away from that a little bit more, because I have, as of right now, favor more on like the physiologic changes to help influence the actual like what's actually happening in the body and then letting the mind follow afterwards versus leading with the mind and then hoping like that influences the body.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I've seen more it to be more effective, not only for myself, but for like other, like with clients and stuff I've worked with. And I've read a couple of studies too, where like I think you have to have like it's like 60% or greater self-security before mantras or anything like that help anyways. I'll have to find the paper, but it was like wild. I was like, okay, this makes sense why for some people, those type of internal dialogue affirmations don't really change much for you. And it's got to be more of like that physical, actual changes with the body to help clear out some of the stuff with the mind. And then once there's more room made, then there's like room to breathe, essentially.
Yeah. I think that's, to me, kind of like the next level. And there's more people talking about this. My friend Dr. Lisa has talked about this, and there's a book I did with I was looking at it, Jennifer Hines. There's a podcast on here talking about mental health and movement, and I think we're getting more data now to show that if you've got some quote mind issue or thing you're trying to change, then yeah, you can probably change it with your mind, but maybe you need to do something body related and vice versa.
Yeah.
Right? So I remember some of the training I did on Be Activated. I remember Doug Heel saying that the mind is in the body and the body is in the mind.
Yeah.
Right? And you can go all the way back, to, scientists, philosophers who've been trying to figure out what is consciousness, how is your brain related to your body, and is it an embodiment or are they separate? And I think, unfortunately, science, because how it's been siloed, has kind of split those areas apart, right? So there's the neurology department, and then there's the physiology, and there's exercise phys and kinesiology, and they're all in their own little silos. And now we're trying to get, I think, better at figuring out what is it for you as a human organism.
Yeah.
Because as you're working with clients, then it's the entire person that's sitting in front of me. Like maybe they have something physical going on, so maybe it is their mindset that's screwing them up. Right. Yeah. Or they can't get out of their own head. So maybe they need something physical, to do. Obviously, we're not trying to treat any disease or anything, but just getting them moving forward towards their goals.
Yeah. It's interesting that like we're kind of trying to come full circle too. Cause I remember when I like first started becoming even just remotely interested in this world as like an adult. And I was like, it was seriously so bothersome for me that like the mind and the body are in like separate compartments, and I'm just like, I don't understand, right? Like it's all in one, and this is my weird term, so it's all in one skin suit, right? We're all in one big old thing of skin, and all of this is connected, like all of it, like this brain helps guide all of the functioning going on all through here. And I just think it's like, I remember I was so upset about it. But then at the same time, I have grown into an understanding in the sense that like there's so much like when you're looking at the science and the medicine and the research and the discoveries and just everything that we have stumbled upon in like the universe that lives inside of here. And so in a sense, I can understand it because it's like one lifetime and one human being isn't going to be able to like completely conceptualize the intricacies of an entire human being in physiology and kinesiology and neurology and organic chemistry and like all of the things that can go on. So I think divide and conquer was essentially the concept. But now we like we divided and we kind of separated and we disintegrated the body. And so now it's like, how can we all come back together and like put like self egos aside, or like a lens that like this modality is the only best modality ever to walk the planet Earth. And like, how can we come together and integrate as practitioners to like help human beings be more integrated beings?
Yeah, because I think if you believe the human body is survival based, then there has to be multiple redundant systems. And if that's true, then my bias is that there has to be multiple inroads to make change, right? Yes. Because if there's only one thing that created a huge change, then everybody would agree on the one thing, right? But we don't. And for different people, different states, depending on what they have going on, maybe even their thoughts about what they believe in certain therapies or whatever, yeah, there's going to be things that are probably more efficacious than other things for sure. But I think it's kind of egotistical for people to say that only this thing works and everyone needs to do exactly this thing, which has been, usually proven wrong, right? We can still find things that are more efficacious, but I don't think we're ever going to get it down to it's just this one thing and that's what everybody has to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to encourage people to shy away from this is the only way type of individuals, just because it's like most of the time, because I've been there too, right? I feel like anyone who's been in the health and wellness or medical industry, like you get to a point where like, this is the way. I know it. Like I know it. And I want everyone to try it because I want everyone to feel better. And I just know this is it. And then once you get past that point, then you get into the world of I'm never going to know everything. And most of the time, what I know will probably be wrong in like the next 1 or 2 years. Like, and it's just like there's so much that you don't know. And so then you just do the best with what you have. And that's like, I think a challenge with humanity across the board is like, we always want like a finality of like a concept or a finality of an answer or a finality of a direction. And with the human body, there's always going to be things that change. Like this year or the next 3 years or whatever, like this might be the modality that works really, really well for your body. And then like it might change. One day your body might change. And then all of a sudden that one guy said was the answer to everything. Now that one's your answer for like 6 months, So it's like this, almost this need for, we need an answer. We need answers. It's like how we have become as advanced as we are and why we're always asking the question of like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's both the art and the science, right? Because research is only like my little phrases I like is research will give you kind of the general direction, but research will give you the answer. Right? Because most people only care about like an N of one answer, right? Yeah. I mean, I could have a client sit in front of me and we could do something and they get a crazy result and then be like, oh, well, here's 17 studies. It says that shouldn't have happened. Like they don't give a shit about any of those studies. They're like, it happened,
Work for me.
You could argue that could be a placebo. Who knows? Right. And I've gotten into some, we'll say discussions online where I'm like, because they're opposites, right? So if I'm designing a research study, I want to have a placebo group. I want it to be randomized. I want to do all these things to have it be statistically significant. We're trying to figure out what we can know just a tiny part, right? But trying to disprove something. If I'm working as a clinician or a trainer, I'm trying to do the exact opposite of that. I placebo the shit out of people.
Yes.
Right. As long as I know it's not going to make them any worse. Right. I know there's not a negative downside to it because the reality is they care about the result. And that's what you're getting paid for as a result. Now, again, that can go too far and people can do all sorts of wacky stuff. And that's a whole separate discussion in and of itself. But at the end of the day, like, what are you using as your measuring stick? Right? Were you trying to do a research study and you just didn't have it, properly controlled? Then it's a bad research study, right? Yeah. Or it's not at the same level of efficaciousness. But I'd argue if you're a clinician and you're not trying to do everything you can to help the person in front of you, again, making sure you're within your scope of practice, you're not doing things that are going to make them worse or taking, excessively high risks.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're supposed to do, right? Because I was interesting how I hung out with some pretty advanced body workers in the past, and some of them were amazing. Like you'd have a therapy session with them, you're like, holy crap, that was amazing. Like, why did you do this one thing? And many of them are like, I don't know. Like, you don't know? Like, you have no idea? Like, no. Like, do you have any theoretical things about what might happen? And some were like, no, I just felt like this is tight and I did this or that. Right. It's like getting Michael Jordan as a coach, right? You're so unconsciously competent that he probably would be a very bad coach. Yeah. Right. Because he probably doesn't remember what it was like to not be good. Right. Which is why like some of the best athletes are horrible coaches.
Yeah.
Right. Because like, you just do this one thing. Like, no, I'm not, the one thing doesn't work for me. Right. And some of the coaches are also not the best athletes either. Right. But they're able to get people at a much better level because they can see what's going on. They can give them the next drill to get them to do the next level. So I think a lot of times we conflate those two, right? That Oh,
Yeah.
this person can deadlift, 700 pounds. They must be a great coach. They might be, but they might not be. Right. It
Yeah.
doesn't automatically mean that they could teach somebody else how to do that beyond themselves.
Being able to break that down too is like because if you've put in like so many reps, right? And then you've moved through it for your own individual body and your own individual like techniques, and then being able to reverse engineer that is like, it's like a skill set. I feel like it's like a capability that you have mentally, or that you've developed maybe intentionally mentally too. Cause I feel like for a lot of either professional athletes of any sport really, or even like any skill, they maybe didn't start off with the intention of like ever coaching. And
Right.
so then
And that wasn't their job, right? I don't think Michael
yeah.
Jordan ever wanted to be a coach. He's like, I just want to be the best basketball player. So for what he
Yes.
wanted to do, 100%, that's by far like the best path.
Yes, by far the best path.
Yeah.
You did it for sure.
I interrupted you there. So
No. I completely agree with you. Like, it's just, they never had the intention of it. So it's like when he didn't have to cultivate the awareness around like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing when you do that? They're just like, no, I asked my body to do it. And I did a million reps of it and perfected and wiggled out all of the stuff that wasn't working. And I just threw it away. It's like when you brain dump after like an exam that you don't care about, right?
yeah.
Like, I did it, I got the A, and all the information's in the trash. And I don't know how I got there because I'm not intending to teach somebody about this, versus if you're like, all right, I'm going to have to teach somebody about everything I'm taking this exam on after I take this exam. So I'm going to like really learn the information and like keep it in there until I teach somebody.
Yeah. Which is why I like when I taught more college students, I always like teaching grad students more than undergrads, because grad students always had the realization of like, oh shit, I'm going to have to know this because I'm going to go have to get a job and someone's going to expect me to know this. Right. So they're almost more willing to learn stuff, not just pass an exam. Where like, statics or freshman, sophomore class, that the question all the time is this going to be on the exam? And that used to just drive me insane. It's like, I understand it because a lot of professors don't set stuff up. They put things that they've never talked about on the exam. So I understand why it's a question. And when I was in that state, that was my first question all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to get people past that because they're just thinking, I just need to get a good grade, not
Right.
I need to learn the material. Right. And those things are not always the same thing. Right. I mean, there's classes I've gotten an A in that I couldn't tell you squat about any of it right now, and I probably couldn't tell you 2 days after the final exam either.
Yep. That's like undergrad was like, cause I just recently finished my undergraduate last year, and going from like, even just like military setting to like actually like going through an undergraduate too, it was just really interesting. Cause it is, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but I feel like it's almost like the more passive part of your like higher education experience, because you're just like, you're just going to go get this degree. Like, it's like your ticket to the playground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can either like, you have to go get this degree so you can like get access to all these other jobs, or you have to get this degree so that you can have access to like a higher education that you want to be moving towards, and like hopefully get some exposure to what you really want to get, like a master's or a PhD in. But it was always really interesting to me, just like, because I love learning. I'm like obsessed with it. Like, I have to put like a limit on myself every year for like, you're only allowed to like take this many certifications or like this many courses. But it was always really interesting, just like how many people are moving passively through like the education experience.
Yeah. Well, do you have a few more minutes, or what's your hard stop for today?
I do. I have plenty of time. I got to my hard stop would be like 1:00. So
okay. All right. Yeah. But yeah, I was going to ask you about if you wanted to share, and again, we can cut this part out if you don't, about the first time we met you was down at our wonderful friend, Dr. Ben House's place down in Costa Rica. And it was awesome to see so many people from different walks of life, trainers who wanted to, speaking about education, wanted to learn more and, train and do everything. And then we ended up doing some RPR on you if you wanted to talk about how that went.
I would love to. Absolutely.
Because I do think it does relate into kind of transitions and things that everyone, myself included, always kind of subconscious things that people can carry forward too.
Yes, 100%. So I'll give kind of like a little bit of a mini, very fast background on kind of like what got me there. So I ended up getting medically discharged from the Navy for what they call a chronic pelvic pain condition. Very broad spectrum. It was undiagnosed and just kind of was this mystery. And I think the hardest part about that was not only was I going through this transition of leaving the service, but now I was leaving the service not on my own accord. And I was having to say goodbye to this idea of this like fully wildly intense, athletic, like super driven, no pain body that I had for most of my life up to that point. And I had no answers. I had absolutely no answers. And for a period of time there, like as I was getting discharged from the service and for a little while after, like my biggest accomplishment every day was like getting out of bed and like going to eat food. Like if you can get out of bed today and you can make it to the kitchen, you did it. Right. And it's just so painful. I spent so many nights awake, just enduring crazy stuff. And so I made it to the Costa Rica retreat because I had started this coaching business and I was kind of like this little baby coach who was like, I want to teach nutrition.
That's how they all talk too.
Yeah, that's definitely how I just want to help people.
I want to help everyone.
Yeah, everyone with everything. That's all. And so I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I was so nervous, right? Like I'm going down to Costa Rica to meet these people who have been in this field for so long to present this research and this whole research project and all these things. And I'm like going through this whole time in my life where I was like, I don't even know who I am. Like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I have this insane amount of pain in my body that will not move. It will not change. Like it's there every day. And so I think we were on like the fourth or fifth day. And so I had gotten to watch you present and like a bunch of other people present up to that point. And so you had talked about RPR and I had heard a couple other people talk about it and seen a couple sessions. And
you weren't completely scared away. So that's a good thing.
I was like so stoked on it because I was like, I'm kind of like I'm a pain and gain type of gal, right? I have been most of my life. And so I was like, wow, this looks like it's really miserable. It's probably so I was like, worth a try. And that I remember we went through like the whole session and then you went to the release my right VMO process. And I literally released so much emotion came up. Like it was one of those moments where you're just like overwhelmed by it. Like there was no vision, no, like there's nothing that came to indicate why it would be there. Right. And up to this point, it had been almost 2 years of consistent intense pain. I was on tramadol. I had been regularly taking narcotics and like the pain it's just would never go away. It would never change. And that night after RPR was the first night in 2 years that I had been pain-free, like completely pain-free. And like, I was like, I remember laying awake at night and being like, what is this? What is happening? And I cried of joy, of course. And that to me is like, it's just insane because up to that point, nothing could influence it. And I had tried everything, right? Like every swear by it modality, right? And gone through all the scans, gone through all the tests, gone through all the things. And so to have it move, that to me was kind of like the day that the dam was blown up. Right. And like, it was the only thing that could remove that dam. And so now ever since then, it's been this really amazing journey. It's been about 2 years, I think, since then.
Yeah.
it's been this really cool journey of like, now I'm in this really deep like communication with my body where I still have the pain, but it's not every day. It's not insanely like just clenching my life with its jaws of misery. It's like I have room to breathe, and I have learned so many more techniques and like tools to just like keep more regulated, right? And it was that break in the pain, right? Like that change in the nervous system, like it needed something to reset and to release. And I think a lot of it stemmed from like my insatiable need for just high speed for most of my life, and the lack of room for anything other than that. And I just kept storing every experience that I ever had in my body because I was like, oh, it's good. Like, keep going. Right. Like,
It'll be
just,
fine.
yeah, we'll just put that
Yeah.
one in here. We'll put this one in here. And so, yeah, it was, I mean, don't think I'll ever have a, like, I don't think that memory will ever become uncolored. Like, it's just so bright and vibrant. And like, I can remember it like it was like last week. It was crazy. It's
and I remember you held Jody's hand for about like 15 minutes too.
Yes. Jody's the best. It's like, she is the most perfect person to be in those situations with you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think for people listening too, like, you know, what do you have is like called omnicontextual pain, meaning nothing makes it better. Nothing paradoxically makes it worse, right? And you're like, oh my God, how could it get any worse?
Yeah.
You have almost no oscillations. There's no variability in it. And so people I've worked with, like I've had a good friends who've had that, a lot of military people, and it's just hard to watch. And then where I get super worried about them is once they reach that point where they feel like they're out of options.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I saw a guy kind of go through this with the therapist he's working with, saying, you know, they're just starting to talk about like weird experimental procedures, like highly invasive stuff. And to see like kind of the light kind of drain out of his eyes of like, this is the end. I was like, oh shit, you know.
Yeah.
To his credit, he decided, okay, I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to figure this out on my own. I'm not going to rely on anybody else. And, you know, luckily he was able to get some stuff figured out. But to be there in the room as that's like happening, not knowing what direction the person's going to go, it's just like, oh, and I get it. Like, because your brain is thinking, I don't know what else to try. Like, I've tried all this stuff.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it better. Doesn't make it worse. So that's always one of the questions I ask people is like, does anything modify it? Because if you can find something that modifies it, then not only do you have a little bit of leverage, you kind of give the person hope, you kind of have a direction to go. But I get super worried about people once their perception is I don't have any more leverage. I'm kind of out and I don't know what to do. And the pain is still there. You know, it's like, oof, that's just so scary.
It is. It's really scary. And like coming from my own story, right? I think the hardest part about, I know for me, right? Speaking from my own experience, is like, because I still live with it, right? Like, it's like at this point, it's like, oh yeah, that's my homie. Like, he just came around the corner, right? That's, you know, and like I can't even really put in like, I can't measure how many moments. It usually happens at night because the world is asleep and it's more acceptable to be like awake at 2 a.m. and no one sees you when you're having these moments, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've like been sitting in the bathroom, like just literally crying my eyes out. Like, I have nothing left. I have nothing left. I have no other stone to turn, you know? And it's almost every time after those moments, right? Like you said, you either have to make the decision to kill yourself or make the decision to keep taking this into your own hands and move forward, right? Like, there's so many modalities out there, so many. And I over and over again have thought I've ran out of ideas. And every time I thought I made it to the end of the road, there was more road. I just didn't know yet. And I didn't know someone to show me something else. And like the biggest thing that's made the world of a difference for me is having people in a community around me that believe I can get better,
Mm-hmm.
that really believe I can get better. Because when I got discharged, and this is like one of my biggest things with the military medical system and the whole like medical discharge space, is the doctors that were discharging me didn't believe I would get better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
literally like straight up, like they were just like, oh yeah, you'll have this for the rest of your life. Like you will never, ever, ever, ever feel good again. And if anything, it's like I literally got told it was my fault that I was in
Right.
pain.
Yep.
And then they were, trying to throw out all crazy stuff. Like she literally told me that I should get a hysterectomy. I was like,
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty sure that you guys already figured out that there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
why would that be a good idea?
Why would that help when there's nothing wrong with it?
Yeah. And then like did a laparoscopy too, just to like kind of look around in there. And it's just a lot of invasive stuff. And any person I've ran into who has an invisible like pain, right? An invisible condition, like no matter how dark and heavy some of the days can get, like you cannot stop hoping that there's something more, because there's been more space and room to breathe in my life than ever before. And if I would have given up a long time ago, I would have never been able to like do anything, like travel, come and see you and Jody,
Yeah.
like go to Costa Rica, like do any of that stuff. Like that was all so hard for me. And now it's like, no, I can just like go on a vacation or go on a trip or go on a 4-hour road trip and sit down and not feel like I'm going to be like in so much pain for 2 weeks,
Yeah. And I think those expectations are also huge if, medical people are listening. Another good buddy of mine got discharged from the military. He in Iraq got hit over the back of the head that smashed in the side of his skull. Like I saw his x-rays, like the whole part of his back of his head was imploded. And then he fell out of a helicopter on his back 2 stories up. So when he got out of the military, he did a lot of stuff to be more functional. So paradoxically, he didn't get a lot of medical pay or anything from it because he was considered too functional to, sort of qualify for anything. But he would have just crushing headaches, never complain about it. I remember being in some training classes with him, just looking at him in the corridor, lying down with his hoodie pulled over him, looking like as white as the wall behind him.
Wow.
You're just like, holy crap, and he, would go to the military at the time. This is many years ago. Hopefully it's getting better.
Yeah.
Then, here's your, trash bag full of opiates. Have fun. And he's like, but I don't want to do that. He's like, that is like for him. And again, it's a personal choice. I'm not saying people shouldn't do it, but for him, he's like, that's like the last of the last options. Cause he's like, I can't function. He's like, I can't do anything on him. He's like, the side effects were, horrible.
Yeah.
He went on vacation to a place that had much lower atmospheric pressure. And all of a sudden he had like a couple hours where he didn't have headaches and his headaches started getting better.
What?
Yeah. And, could have been environment, could have been change in location. Who knows? So we ended up moving to a different location. And that kind of allowed him, kind of like you were saying, the dam that kind of opened like that, just that small amount of leverage combined with, he was very knowledgeable about what was going on. Fast forward, he still has some days where he has, some headaches here and there, but, nothing, like it was before.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to see people going through that, because I would imagine that in that state, like your brain is almost incapable of thinking of the options.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If anyone's had like really, really high amounts of pain, like it's very hard to think your way or even move your way out of it at that point. Right.
Yeah.
Because you can't really focus. You can't really think, very clear. So I think having, the people that can help with whatever modality it is. And I also then think that destroying the narrative then of I'm always going to have pain.
Yeah.
So like in your case, like my thought pattern was, you're like, oh my God, I had like a few hours last night of no pain. I was like, awesome. In my head, I'm even thinking that even if you went back to having pain at a 10 out of 10,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a monumental win, because that narrative now is not true.
Yeah.
The narrative of I will always have pain the rest of my life is 100% not true. So even if it took many months or, obviously a lot of the work that you've done, I think there's something really powerful about discrediting what you've been told is supposed to be true. I think that's even worse when you've had MRIs, you've had laparoscopy, you've had all these medical procedures. Mechanically, everybody's telling you you should be fine, but you're clearly not, right? I think that kind of sets up this internal narrative of like, am I batshit crazy? What am I doing? Am I bonkers? Like there's supposed to be nothing wrong with me, but I have this huge amount of pain that's just horrible.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. It's in that, man, like if I can tell any aspiring doctor or even like just anyone in working in this field, really, like anyone who is directly working with individuals on the internals of like how their body works and feels, like those absolutes, even just saying that one time to somebody who is already like lower on their fuel of hope left,
right?
Like that really settles into the body. And like if I wouldn't have gotten that break in pain after our RPR session, like it is like you said, when I'm in those nights, I cannot think of anything else.
Yeah.
I'm literally sitting there and I'm like, there is no other option. Like I have not a single one more. And it's creating that mobility and creating that at least the small whisper of like, I have had a moment without it. So if I can have one moment without it, that means there is potential for more moments without it. Right.
Right.
So like that dialogue from medical professionals or even just health and wellness professionals is so vital. And then like also like reaffirming that like their lived experience is their lived experience, whether or not an x-ray shows it, an MRI shows it, an ultrasound shows it. Like if you are experiencing pain in your body, it is valid. It is real. It is not seen by anyone else, but it is known for you. And like nobody else needs to tell you it's real. Like, it's real. So let's figure out how we can move it for you together, even though I don't feel it. You know?
Yeah. And I always go back to the feeling is believing.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, before we had the RPR session, I probably could have tried to talk to you about all this and you'd be like, screw off, whatever. Right. You know, like you were a very nice person. You would listen, but subconsciously it's very hard when you get to a certain point to believe anything else. Right. But once you actually feel the change that happens, and I think that sometimes that's why, you know, psilocybin with therapy for quitting smoking and some of these other, you know, plant medicines, et cetera, are so profound and open up kind of a window of change, because if anyone's ever done them, like you have the most like real feelings that you've ever had about things. I know that sounds very bizarre, but it's hard to come out of that situation and be like, oh, wow, like you felt what it felt like to be wherever you were. Right. So I think to have the sensation of not having pain, that is something that 100% happened, right? You can't think your way out of that it didn't happen, because it did. And then the narrative is no longer true, which then allows you to kind of, you know, build forward from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Having that almost like I actually saw the grass was greener moment.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I got to peek over the wall and then now I get to like chip away at the wall. It's been that was seriously, it was like the pivot point, the moment where it all got to like shift into something new. Cause it was like, man, if this is my life, like I've recently had a dialogue with somebody that literally mirrored back a conversation to me that I had with myself like 3 years ago. And they were like, if I'm going to feel like this forever, like, I don't think I want to live past like 40. And I remember saying that to myself. I was like, man, if I'm like this at like 20, how old was I? 26. Sorry, there's police officers driving by just in case they're making noise. I think I was like 26 and I was like, man, if I am going to, or 27, if I'm going to live like this forever, and this is like how I feel, and everyone who's older than me tells me it just gets worse from here. Right, like it's just, you get more achy or whatever. Then like, how am I supposed to keep going? Like, and then I had this really weird reverse thought where like most people are like, you know, you want to live this long, healthy life to like 90. I was like, what if I do live till 90 and like no natural causes take me? And then I'm just like, So it's been like such an interesting journey, but I'm really like, now that I'm in the space I'm in, like it's afforded me the opportunity to learn so much about these different modalities. And like I've had to try a lot. Like I've knocked on almost every door that I currently know, right? Until more road shows up. But it's cool because it's like there's so many modalities out there that like people don't necessarily understand, like RPR, right?
Yeah.
And like once you get into the point where you're ready and willing to do anything to help yourself move into a better space, that's kind of when you find things like RPR, or where you actually go try like some of the more outside of the norm modalities. But it would be really awesome if people could not get to the end of the road mentality where they're like, oh, I will try anything before they try things like that. Because if I could have like been in that space earlier, that many nights avoided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to your credit, like you still took action. You went down to Costa Rica to be with a bunch of weirdos and hang out in the middle of the jungle, not knowing what the hell was going to go on, give a presentation to, a bunch of other more weirdos. And, most people would not have done that, And so when I first met you, I would have never thought you had that much level of pain like that. Like your disposition didn't tell me you had a lot of pain, which is, it's kind of a weird thing that I look for in people, right? Is it, if they're at that point, do they think they can get better? And some people maybe not, still worth trying. But my impression was that you were at the stage where you were still willing to keep trying things, which I think is the point that people, if they're at that point listening to it, obviously, get professional help. But I could almost virtually guarantee you, like what you said, you haven't tried everything.
Yeah.
Right? And just because all the other stuff hasn't worked doesn't mean the next thing won't work. Right. It just means it's like the Edison thing with the light bulb. I was like, oh, I had like a 100 or 1,000 experiments that just said, oh, this wasn't the right one.
Yeah.
Right. You didn't think that it's not going to happen. It's not impossible. It just hasn't happened yet. So odds are there's something out there that can probably, even if it just moves the needle a little bit, that allows you that leverage to do kind of the upward ascension instead of the downward spiral. Now you can start chipping away at that and start making progress in a better direction.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my disposition is innate. I've always been my dad calls me sunshine. So I've always been very like, I mean, and my thought process around it when like the pain was the most severe is always like, and this might not be the healthiest for any like professional psychologist listening. But my thought process around it was always like, just because I'm suffering doesn't mean that the people around me need to see my suffering, because a lot of the time that causes suffering for others, right? Like it's not easy to watch somebody else suffer and just be like, oh yeah, okay, cool, like rock on, I'm gonna like keep having a great day. And so it's like, even though my internal world feels heavy and dark, if I continue to embody that, then it's just going to make the internal world heavier and darker. Versus if I can like at least still bring like some of that light and that fun and that laughter and excitement externally, then it can help me endure what's going on in here without bringing the rest of my world into like the shade or the cloudiness of what's going on. But one thing that did change for me a lot with that, from when I first was like kind of starting to experience this to like where I am now, is I really like, for anyone who is going through anything like this or knows anyone going through anything like this, it has made all the difference for me to have at least one person that will sit with me and knows that the inner world is real for me, will validate it. Because when I kept it all to myself, it made me feel even crazier, right? Because
Yeah.
my God, no one believes me. And it's awkward. No one even knows that's going on for you. Like they can't believe you unless they know. And at least you give them a chance to like believe you and support you. And so that has been such a huge thing for me, to just like have somebody see my lived experience and believe me in it and sit with me in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was fortunate when we met. Like I had some other people I had worked with who had kind of similar situations. One of them when we were down, I was down doing a trip in Baja, and so I helped one of the guys who was down there because he had called in and said, he was supposed to do a paragliding lesson. He's like, oh, I can't because my back hurts. And so I said, come over, we'll do some stuff, work on him. He's like, oh, my back feels so much better. So he calls the guy. He's like, I could do my lesson now. He's like, what the hell happened to you? Like, you just called and canceled like 3 hours ago. And he was like, I worked on this crazy guy and he did some other stuff. And so the instructor calls this other person who was down there who she had some back pain and was like working on her laptop, like laying on her back for like 6 weeks or something.
What? Jeez.
So I talked to her on the phone, and my first thought was like, I don't know, like, because you always wonder, like, what's going on? Are they going to be receptive to this? I don't know this person. It's a referral from somebody else. They don't know me.
Yeah.
Like you just wonder how the interaction's going to go. And she's like, okay. And I said, I can't make any promises. I said, we'll try some stuff. It's probably going to be really painful. If it helps, it helps. I said, I can guarantee you it's probably not going to make you any worse than what you were before. She's like, all right, great. We'll try it. So she was staying at a place just down the road. And in La Ventana, there's a lot of outdoor places. So there's a little outdoor kitchen and there's this like folding table there.
Cool.
So we put her up on the folding table. It's this like weird, surreal like environment because you can overlook the ocean there. And there's a guy hanging out on this couch that these people just wielded and just dropped outside because it doesn't rain there. It's like a desert. So there's like stuff all outside. And he's just sitting there like trying to read his book while we're doing the session, which was, pretty painful.
Yeah.
And most of her issues was her, rib cage, similar to you, like most people, just super stuck. Worked on her for about 2 hours. She gets up and walks around, like doesn't have any pain. She's like, what is this? This is so crazy.
Wow.
The guy who was on the couch reading is just like looking over, going like, what is going on over there? So we end up going out to one of the bars there that night. And she shows up at the bar. She comes out, gives me this big hug, and she's like, oh, thank you so much. And everyone's like, well, what the hell happened, to her? And so she's referring me back to like 3 other people that I went with. They're like, oh, I got this thing over here I need help with. It's so wild. But similar type circumstance. She had tried a whole bunch of other stuff. She had, gone down there to go kiteboarding. She'd worked online, but she couldn't work. She could barely, type with her laptop above her. And yeah, so it's just crazy sometimes how I don't know what inputs, I don't know exactly what was beneficial, but the end result was it was better.
Yeah.
Right. And so I always think of that in terms of just trying something that'll probably help. And again, there's, other than some pain, there doesn't appear to be as much of a downside with it either. So the good part about that is when I had the conversation with you, I was like, well, I think in your head, like you can't really predict outcomes, but you're like, well, it worked for that person. And I had, worked on people for like 3 years before. And sometimes you just see crazy stuff and it doesn't always work, but a vast majority of the time it's like, wow, that seems to help. So thank you for doing it and your results, and just being willing to try it too. So I appreciate it. And it's one of those you always think back on. Of course, you try to think back on more of the positive when things work out. And so sometimes I even think of your particular case when I'm working on someone. I'm like going, well, I don't know. Maybe this is a thing. It's definitely happened many times in the past, not all the time.
Yeah.
So I think just having that experience to refer back on, even if that was one of only a handful of things that I ever do that helps someone, like more than worth all the education, the time and everything else that went into it. No, too, just, to kind of have that experience and to see what's possible too.
Yeah. I joke with people, but it's definitely not really actually a joke, but I was at the point where I was literally like, if I go to a doctor and they're like, if you just stab this leg with a knife, it'll get everything better. I was like, bring it on.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. Whatever it takes. And especially too, like being able to have like that social affirmation and like other people had gone through it. And it was just like that is one thing with like trying different modalities that I encourage a lot of people with, is like like you said, right, that risk versus reward factor. Like, what are the chances that this is going to make you better, and what are the chances that this is going to make you worse? Like, is there a danger factor to it? And it's kind of like, if you go and you, like, I encourage people all the time, like, if you're looking to go to a new practitioner and you feel uncomfortable about it, ask them if you can just come meet them, like do a meet and greet interview. Like, you can ask them about the modality, you can ask them about themselves, you can really get a good feel for them. Because I've gone to people before that I ended up not liking. I didn't think that they did a great job with their treatment or anything like that, and I got zero results. And then I go to like a different practitioner of the same modality, and it like changes everything.
Totally. Yes.
So it's like there's so much, like there's a whole iceberg beneath the surface when it comes to these types of modalities. And it's like, I think for you and Jody with RPR, like you provide this amazing safe space where it's literally, at least like for me, I can identify it as a safe space, because like I feel even though it's painful and it's gonna suck, you're always super honest about it. You're like, this is gonna be really brutal. Like, it's gonna be really bad. And
the worst thing you can do in that situation is lie to someone. Like, they're gonna know in 5 seconds. You lied, bastard.
You told me this was gonna be fine, and it's not. It's not fine. And it's like, when random things surface from the body, like it's a perfectly safe space to like let it all move through you and to breathe through it and let it come up and then like move forward. And the other really cool thing that I like really value about like the space you guys have created and the way that you move through it is like, I know I've always been really private about my inner world, right? Like, it's very scary for me to show or feel like big emotion in front of people besides like big amounts of happiness, right? If it's like other types of feelings, I get really scared to show, because sometimes people make it like this super big deal that you're like showing this emotion. And the really cool thing that I like get to experience with you guys is like, it just is. And you're moving through it, and like you let it pass, and you're safe to do it, and you're okay. And then when you're ready, then you move forward. And it's not like, oh, this huge thing that like has to be like held on to and like obsessed about or anything. It's just like, nope, it came up and moved through you. And now we're going to move on when you're ready. And it's like, that makes a huge difference in my opinion.
Yeah, that's one thing I try to get across when teaching either Be Activated or RPR. I do teach for RPR. So RPR is generally where people are working on themselves. Be Activated is generally where you're working on someone else. But so when I'm teaching RPR, even when people are working on themselves, I try to tell the people that if other things are coming up, I got this from Tom Myers, just be the good neighbor. Just reassure them it's going to be okay. It's going to pass. If they want to talk about it, great. You're not there to diagnose it. You're not telling them any life lessons or anything. You're just there to listen and be empathetic and create and hold a safe space for them. But if you lose your shit in the middle of that, it's not going to end well. You know, I mean, like, so if I start seeing someone, you can see things kind of, come up, because it is a very traumatic thing that you're kind of going through. Again, there's definitely a stress response associated with it. And if you're, as a practitioner, you're not comfortable with it, then, don't go there. And then make sure that you can still kind of hold that space, because you're the only thing that's kind of, in a weird way, sort of tethering them at that point. Right? Because they're just looking for guidance from you. You don't even have to do anything. You're not trying to diagnose anything. You're just there. Hey, it's going to pass. It always passes. Whatever response they have is completely appropriate. I've seen all sorts of crazy shit, and it's okay. And usually I've noticed that people like yourself that are brave enough to let it go, like they generally do a lot better. And some people are just not ready at that point, and that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong associated with it at all. But just a caveat if practitioners are listening.
Yes, 100%. And like learning how to hold that space of neutrality, I think as a practitioner I know for me, it was like a skill set I had to develop over time, being exposed to like those deeper moments of emotion with people and being able to like really still like be there, like the good neighbor mentality, and like not like, I don't want to cry. Like, you can't cry right now. Like, they're crying. you can't cry right now. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
like not your pain. Like you get to be like that co-regulator. Like they get to regulate to like, okay, there is space of safety and there is space of like, I am going to be okay. So I'm just going to like be here and moving through all my stuff. And they're going to keep paddling the boat down the river while I
Mm-hmm.
like do this thing. And then I'll come back online soon.
Yeah.
And it's like learning that was super cool because then it's like now that higher voice in my head kind of gets to like co-regulate for me when I'm like, having a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also liked your point too about, I mean, I've had some other therapies done that have been very painful, and some of them have been very effective, and some of them not really effective at all. And
Yeah.
almost every time where it hasn't been very effective, there's this little voice in my head that's like, okay, it's painful, but it just doesn't feel right. It just feels wrong. Not that they did anything wrong, not that the technique was inappropriate or anything like that. It just, I was surprised that there's a difference between it's painful and it feels like we're going in the right direction versus it's painful and we're going down the wrong path,
Yes.
wrong direction, wrong direction.
Turn around.
And I think people have just paying attention to that comes up. And most of the time, like I can't even, when it's happening, I can't give you any reason as to what it was. Like I have no logical reason for it. And,
Yeah.
even when we did the first plant medicine trip we did in Costa Rica, I told Jody, I'm like, okay, so if we walk in and we meet, in this case, the shaman, the teacher, or whatever she wants to be referred to as, she was great. I'm like, if I have the sensation that it doesn't feel right, I'm like, here's all my money, here's my cash, I already paid, I already committed, great, I'm out.
No.
Right.
Yep.
And everything went fine and it was great. But I think the older I've gotten, just knowing that may come up, and if it does, just at that moment kind of trusting it and kind of moving forward from there.
Yeah. I've heard this said a bunch of times that like once you get to where you're like 80, like you're like a old weathered, been on the planet for a long time person, then you just stop caring, right? And you start doing things that just like really, like if it doesn't feel good for you, you just leave like unapologetically. And I say this to people, I'm like, my goal is to do that way before 80, like
Yes.
way.
Yeah.
Like I'd really like to do that like yesterday or like before my 30th birthday or like, move into that mentality earlier because like you were stepping into a space of like, man, like when you go on a plant medicine trip with like a guide or a shaman or a teacher, like that has to feel good. It has to. And the people you're
Yes.
doing it with. And
Oh yeah.
same with like any of these like practitioners or people that are like really
Yeah.
helping
Same
you
idea.
along. Same idea. So it's like if you don't feel good, like worry about you. Like worry about you. And like you can always articulate it out of love and intention. But like these people are putting their energy and time and intention into your healing process. So if you're going to cultivate a team around you to help you heal, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, like the people you choose to be on your team needs to be carefully cultivated. And that inner voice is going to guide like so much. Like I've had so many moments where I literally have met somebody and been like, just kidding.
Yeah. I'm out.
Keep my money and I will
Yeah.
never see you again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of those lessons I wish someone would have told me a lot earlier in life too, so because I always thought that I had to justify it logically, and a lot of times it's just a sensation you come up. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it in the book Blink,
Yes.
like how you're making these like split second decisions, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, but then you always look at what is the risk reward. If I step away now, I'm probably not going to get any reward, but I've minimized all downside, right? So like one of my philosophies is, I'm okay taking a potential exponential reward that is uncertain as long as the risk is minimized, right? As long as I minimize the downside to what I believe in that situation is going to be the lowest, then whatever happens. Worst case, nothing will happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. right? Versus some things have a potential very high reward and very high risk that's involved in them too, right? Which I think that takes a lot more time and careful decision at that point, right? Because like even, when we're doing the ayahuasca ceremony, I remember afterwards thinking, wow, that went well. Wasn't easy. People had all very different experiences that I got to see because my experience was super late. But I'm like, holy shit, I could see how that could go sideways like so many different ways.
So many ways.
Yeah. So I think trusting that person and the experience and the people you've done it with, and we were lucky we wanted people who had done it before in the same place, and all that kind of stuff. And there were people who were very discerning, so a lot of it you're kind of leaning on other people's experience too, combined with what you think your intuition is also.
Yeah, it's that social trust for sure. And I love that book, Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
That's still one of my favorites by him by far.
So good, and just so well written. I feel like very digestible, like to all education levels and all exposure levels. But my version of that, what you were talking about, is like, what's the absolute worst case scenario?
Yeah.
Like, what is in it? If that absolute worst case scenario happens, is that an acceptable level of risk for you?
Right.
And like, I play that game all the time with people. Like, it's like, and with myself, right? Where it's like, if you're having a moment of like, you're really stressing about this social situation or this investment or this appointment or this whatever, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen? And most of the time it's like something that is so tolerable when it comes to the risk, but it's like our brain is like on loop trying to like find all these things that could potentially be wrong and isn't finding anything. So it's just like winding you up. Like, give yourself an actual baseline. Like, what is the worst thing that could happen to you from this decision that you're so stressed about? And if you can accept that risk, then you should just let it go, because you're going to be okay.
Yeah. And I even found myself, I went to a conference this past weekend here in the cities, and it was great. I knew a lot of the speakers and everyone, and it was awesome. But I also realized, like, going there, and for some reason because of the pandemic and being home and not speaking as much, the weird part is, like, if I'm speaking at a conference, like it doesn't bother me. But if I'm attending, I realize that it's walking into the threshold of a whole bunch of people that I don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this weird irrational thing, especially being a lot more introverted, that again, I had to kind of walk myself through, what's the worst possible? No one's going to come after me. Nobody even knows who I am here. Like, there's nothing bad that's going to happen here. It's this irrational fear of just being around a bunch of people again. And then once you get kind of through that, hey, everything was fine. And it was great.
Yeah.
But I also realized, I'm like, oh, I used to have this like years ago, like the first conference I went to, like I was so nervous. I didn't want to be there. I felt like it was out of place. I threw up in the bathroom 3 times the first day because I was just so like distraught about the whole thing. And I realized that part of it was from that, but I had so many reps of doing it over the course of years, it got easier. And now having that gap, that space from not having done it for a while, it's like you kind of almost go back to kind of like the first anchoring thing, and you're like, oh, weird.
Weird. I remember this in a far off distant past.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It's crazy how much that like gap in our timeline of 2020, like, created so much of like this new weird social dynamic for a lot of people. Like, even for, I feel like, extroverts, it's like a whole different dynamic to like go back out into the world after like a whole year of not in the world, So I can't even imagine for full introverts, because I'm only partially introverted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I like have to recharge with alone time, and then I'm like back into the world. So I don't know how I'm sure it would be a struggle. Like,
and it's also fascinating and different for different people you would not expect. Like, I remember listening to Rob Zombie gave an interview. I don't know if it was on Joe Rogan or what it was on. And they asked him, they're like, well, this must be, great. Like, you're performing in front of thousands of people. You've been doing this, for decades, like, you must not, get nervous before performances. And he's like, nah, he's like, you get a little nervous, but it's manageable and it's great. But he's like, I'm a huge introvert. Like, I don't even like this interview. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Wow.
And he's like, what? Like, you perform in front of like thousands of people. He's like, but when I'm doing that, he's like, it doesn't feel like they're all individuals. It's just like one thing. And I've done it
Oh.
so many times. I'm just used to it. But like, to be in a small room with just a handful of people, he's like, I feel much more uncomfortable about that. Which to me was crazy, because you would think that someone who's performing and been doing it at a high level for many years in front of so many people at that level, that one-on-one would be nothing. And
Right.
it was the inverse. Right?
Wow.
Almost like some of the military people I've known who've been in there at a high level come back and they're like, going to the grocery store freaked me the fuck out.
Yes.
Like, the grocery store. But then you think about like what their training was and what their level was, it's completely 180 degrees different from what they were so trained and had done for rep after rep after rep after rep. And then just to all of a sudden get dropped out of that into a different environment, for us, it's sometimes always interesting how it can be the inverse of what we would expect it to be.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the grocery store, because that
always seems to be one that comes up with people, and I don't know what it is, but
it's so weird. And I had never had an issue with it until, and I think that the really interesting part for that I've observed with myself and with some of my friends who are veterans is that it doesn't really like unfold for you until it's like year 2 out of the service, right? Like year 1, you're kind of like, I'm free, blah, 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 right? Like, I can take vacation if I want to, whenever, travel whenever, right?
Look, I didn't fold my socks. Ah!
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I can put my clothes in my drawer however I want.
Right.
And you kind of like, pick apart what parts of it you want to keep and what parts of it you want to get rid of. And then like year 2, it's like your mental side starts to kind of like, the walls start to come down a little bit. And then you get to kind of see like, oh, okay, like what parts of this building need like repair and care and attention. And I remember like being at a grocery store. I literally remember standing in the aisle and being like, I think I'm about to have a panic attack. And I thought it was so interesting because I had never experienced one before. And this was also, I think, like not in the middle of the pandemic, but like towards the end of it. And so people are super weird. And there's like all this like weird rules that I'm supposed to follow that I have no idea what I'm supposed to do. And I remember texting my friend and being like, I think I'm about to have a panic attack. And they were like, if you have something cold, put cold on your wrist. It can help like mitigate the intensity of it until you can get somewhere like safe, like back to your car. And I thought it was just like the like hindsight, right? After the whole experience of it, which was terrible and terrifying. I can't imagine what it's like for individuals who go through them regularly, but it's really interesting, like how the civilian world has these almost like this mundane level of stress to it, or this mundane, like habitual patterns of things that seem to have like this weird social rules and structures that are not like as clearly identified as like when you're in the military. It's like everything's pretty clearly identified and you like pretty clearly know the rules of like what you need to follow and what you're supposed to do. And like that's so known. And then you like move into the civilian sector and there's like all these invisible rules that apply to the mundane life. And you're just like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And I think that's like, that's
my bizarro world. What happened?
Yeah, what a weird world we're living in. And like, why does this feel almost more stressful than like the world I was living in that was like designed to be stressful? And I think it's almost like, it's like this decompression effect where you're so used to this like compressive, very linear, like intentionally pretty stressful environment. And then you get to that like decompression space, like on year 2, where there's like, okay, now I'm trying to figure out like, what are the rules around here? And like, do I really like it here? And like, how can I make it more digestible and approachable for me? Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time today. I know you have to run. We really appreciate it. And where can people find more about you if you want to be found?
If
I don't know.
I would love to be found. Come and find me.
Right.
Thank you also for having me on.
Yeah.
It was an absolute pleasure, and I was like so stoked when I got the invite. So I just love having conversations with you anyways. I can be found at KristinaHoyerCollective.com. That's Kristina with a K, and Hoyer, Hoyer collective.com. You can also find me at Kristina Hoyer Collective on Instagram. I don't really do a ton of other social medias because even though I'm a millennial, I'm not a big fan. So, so you can find me at both of those. Please, if you want to, send me a DM. I love like creating genuine, real conversation and community with people. And yeah, thank you again, Mike. It was an absolute pleasure as always.
Yeah, and your Instagram has lots of really good information too, and I think people would really enjoy it, and especially if they're having a little bit more of a hard time or dealing with pain or the stressors that come up. You have lots of really good messages there that I think more people need to hear, and it's useful, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows either, but it's very real and useful, which I really appreciate. So that's been super helpful. So thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it, and we hope to see you again in person sometime soon.
Yes, sometime soon, hopefully.
Fun. Cool.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a wonderful day today, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Really, really appreciate it. Huge thanks to Kristina Hoyer for taking time out to chat with her, as always. Wonderful discussion, so I always enjoy our chats together. Big thank you to her for giving up her time to be a guest on the podcast. Make sure to check her out on her website and especially on Instagram. You can find her on Instagram at Kristina Hoyer Collective. Hoyer is spelled Hoyer. So this episode brought to you by the Physiologic Flexibility Certification. If you want to learn how to become more resilient, robust, and anti-fragile by using different interventions such as heat, cold, changes in pH, such as high-intensity interval training, long, slow distance training, breathing techniques, such as Wim Hof technique, superventilation, breath holds, ketones, carbohydrates, and more. Check out physiologicflexibility.com for all the information. There'll be a place there where you can add your name to the wait list for the next time that it is open. If you want any general information about me, you can always go to the main website, which is miketnelson.com. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Really, really appreciate it. Any feedback on this episode or any other episodes, please get in touch with me or leave a comment on social media. And if you enjoyed this episode and you think it could help someone, please forward it to them. I would really, really appreciate it and help spread the good word. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
I have a good mind to go home.
You had a good mind, you wouldn't be here in the first place.